Welcome to Talmudic Treasures. Today we're learning Nedarim, page 65, which discusses a very peculiar story between Sidkiah and Nebuchadnezzar. We know that Nebuchadnezzar was known to be a very evil king, the king of Babylonia. He was instrumental for the destruction of the first temple. And the question is, what type of personality did he have? And do we have any proof as to how he lived his life? So the Talmud here tells us whether or not a person is allowed to remove a vow. And whether or not that vow, when it's being removed, must it be done in front of the person you're making the vow with? So on this, the Talmud says yes, it technically should be done in front of them. And it discusses a story where Sidkiah noticed King Nebuchadnezzar that he had a rabbit, and the Talmud uses the language and says that it was a live rabbit. On this, Rashi wonders if it was physically alive or it was just raw, but it wasn't cooked. And Nebuchadnezzar started ripping it apart and eating it alive. Now this sounds very strange because one would envision Nebuchadnezzar as a powerful king and not someone who would just be doing something so peculiar. It's actually explained by many that Nebuchadnezzar ended up suffering from a form of mental illness known as Boanthropy, which this illness of Boanthropy is a person who actually believes that they are an animal. And this is a terrible mental illness that does take place, that does exist. In fact, in the 4th chapter in the book of Daniel, it says that for 7 years, Nebuchadnezzar was known to be eating grass. Now, of course, grass is not something which a human being can eat, but basically the idea was saying that he was acting like an animal. And that's how he lived. And Sidkiah saw this, and it was an embarrassment because Nebuchadnezzar realized that no one should know this. The fact that he was suffering from this mental illness, he didn't want anyone to know. And therefore he made Sidkiah swear that he should not tell anyone. And he did. He swore that he would not tell anyone what he saw. However, Sidkiah, it bothered him so much, and in fact, it affected his spiritual well-being because he had this information that he felt was necessary to share, that this is something which is so beyond the pale of what's normal, that people should be aware of this person who is suffering. And he wasn't doing it because he was going to make fun of him, but that people should be aware that this is something that's going on with this king. And he eventually told people about it, and the word went around, and as one can imagine, it became embarrassing for the king. Nebuchadnezzar called the great Sanhedrin, the Jewish court, and he said, "What's going on over here? How did this happen?" So they said, "I'll tell you, I know you're right, he made a vow, but actually in Jewish law, you can have a vow removed." So on this, Nebuchadnezzar said, "Okay, but is it allowed to be done even not in front of my presence?" So technically, it's not supposed to be done that way. In fact, the Talmud says that Sidkiah on some level was punished, that he was removed some element of his greatness, that they removed the pillows where he was sitting, so he had to sit not on as much of a comfortable place. So there's so much that we could understand from here. First of all, the notion of hiding mental illness. A person who suffers from mental illness is a real illness, is a real tragedy. A person, even though they would not want other people to see them in that light, it's important not to hide this. Because in order to be able to get help, you need to be able to share it with other people. And not necessarily is that what Sidkiah's intentions were, but by keeping this to yourself and not helping another individual, that is not necessarily the right way of acting. And we can again see from here this very powerful story, so much that we could learn into the insights of the life of King Nebuchadnezzar.